Welcome to No Apologies. I'm Dana Lash. One of the telltale signs that you're living under an authoritarian regime is that the partisan regime controls all government agencies and also the media. An authoritarian regime must do so. It has to control media, has to control narratives because they have to maintain control the narrative, control the people, which explains why the administration currently is acting like an authoritarian regime, brazenly attacking journalists that dare to challenge their false narratives. And they control the media narratives with covert and increasingly overt censorship using proxies and agents for state like big tech. And increasingly, our government seems fond of weaponizing intel agencies, like when the NSA spied on Tucker Carlson recently, tried to deny it, but receipts. On November 4th, our corrupt intelligence agencies took their Stasi tactics up a notch, and they decided to use the increasingly sullied and discredited FBI to raid the homes of current and former journalists of Project Veritas. So why did the FBI raid Project Veritas? Well, because they had a false reason that the FBI gave. And the actual reason is that they wanted to cover up lies and who knows what else. The false reason the FBI is giving for the raid on Project Veritas, that's James O'Keefe's organization, is that Project Veritas had possession of Ashley Biden's stolen diary. Who gives a rat's ass? It's some broad's diary. Not that anyone at Project Veritas is aware of. They don't know if it was stolen. They never said it was legitimate. It was given to them by a tipster after the diary was left in a hotel room. This is the kind of thing that happens all the time in journalism. Things like, the Steele dossier, a document that was entirely made up by the Clinton campaign, it gets handed to reporters by tipsters. It's then up to the journalist and the news organization to decide what to do with it, determine its validity, vet its authenticity, actually do the job of a journalist and determine if the document is authentic. Something the New York Times didn't bother doing with the now discredited Steele dossier, or the Washington Post, which we'll talk more about later. James O'Keefe, the head of Project Veritas, and his team determined that the Ashley Biden diary given to them by a tipster could not be verified as real, nor could the entries in the diary be verified. So they actually did their jobs as journalists, and they attempted to give the diary back. First, they tried to give it back to Ashley Biden's legal team. They said they didn't want it. Here's James O'Keefe saying exactly that on November 5th on YouTube. Watch.
At the end of the day, we made the ethical decision that because, in part, we could not determine if the diary was real, if the diary in fact belonged to Ashley Biden, or if the contents of the diary occurred, we could not publish the diary and any part thereof. We attempted to return the diary to an attorney representing Ms. Biden, but that attorney refused to authenticate it. Project Veritas gave the diary to law enforcement to ensure it could be returned to its rightful owner. We never published it. Now, Ms. Biden's father's Department of Justice, specifically the United States Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York, appears to be investigating the situation, claiming the diary was stolen. We don't know if it was, but it begs the question: in what world is the alleged theft of a diary investigated by the president's FBI and his Department of Justice?
Yeah, how does this escalate up to that level? The answer to James O'Keefe's question is that we're in the new authoritarian world of the Biden administration. And also, can they raise a child not on drugs? So the FBI would like for us to believe that this raid is over a stolen diary, which I can't even believe we're talking about a grown-ass woman's diary. I'm sorry, I am not going to be able to talk about this seriously. It is a grown-ass woman's diary. First off, you're not sweet 16. You're not very much younger than I am. And maybe just don't be a drug and sex fiend and don't record all this stuff in a handwritten diary if it is your diary in the first place, and we won't have any problems, right? So there's certainly no evidence that Project Veritas stole the diary. Can't believe we're talking about this again. So remember, I said there's the official reason that the FBI gave for the raid, and then there's the actual reason. And the actual reason is that Project Veritas does actual journalism, and they don't fall in line with the butt-kissing authoritarian regime in which we think a spit painting by a reformed, maybe cokehead is worth $500,000 apiece. In fact, Project Veritas has been dropping bombshell revelation after bombshell revelation, and each revelation challenges the grand narratives from the Biden administration. For example, you're told that the injection is totally safe. Take it when you're pregnant. Give it to your 5-year-old. There are no real adverse reactions to speak of. And then Project Veritas drops this video of a whistleblower from Health and Human Services that says, oh no, injuries are happening, and happening much more than our authoritarian administration would like for you to believe. Watch.
The government doesn't want to show that the darn vaccine is full of
Tell us about who this person is.
Dr. Gonzalez is one of our emergency room doctors at Phoenix Indian Medical Center.
And she's a federal employee?
Correct.
Now you got this guy in room 4 who got his second dose of vaccine on Tuesday, has been short of breath.
He's got problem myocarditis.
Yes!
Oh, this is bull.
Let's see.
It's probably myocarditis due to the vaccine.
Right.
But now they're not going to blame the vaccine.
Our authoritarian regime also doesn't want you to believe in natural immunity, even though it's been a scientific fact for as long as humans have been on Earth. It's real. That's a lie that's hard to continue to prop up when Project Veritas releases these tapes of Pfizer employees admitting that natural immunity is just as good, if not better. Watch.
Inside portion of the actual virus, so your antibodies are probably better at that point than the vaccination.
Again, this administration is so intent on you being injected that they are happy for you to lose your livelihood if you don't comply. So any narrative that impedes the mass injection goal must be stopped. Xi Jinping would be so proud. So Project Veritas is a big problem for authoritarians and the Biden administration. And that's because Project Veritas just keeps revealing the truth that the vaccination of all Americans is so integral to this authoritarian regime's goals that they'll say anything to make sure that it happens, like exposing New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy, saying that he would not use mandates to get people to receive the injection when in fact he planned to do exactly that once he got elected. Check out a bit of this bombshell from Project Veritas.
Lo va a hacer, pero no podía hacerlo antes de la elección.
The independent deciders would not vote for him if he did the vandal.
Because they're into all that my rights, my
Once you know we have a win, it's like, all right, guns blazing, like who cares? I mean, let's do the mandates, let's do this, the next one.
So clearly, Project Veritas is a problem for the administration and the administration's plans to get everybody injected, every last American, even those with actual legitimate objections, people with natural immunity, which apparently now we're pretending science isn't real, and even those people who don't need it, like 5 to 11-year-olds, and even though adverse reactions are very real. So what do you do when you're an authoritarian regime and not all journalists are licking your boots and doing what they're told? You raid those uppity journalists' homes on a trumped-up pretext. See, you can't have journalists actually doing, real journalism because that makes the administration's job hard. You have to have propagandists. You're either with us or not. And there are lies that must be supported, false narratives that must be maintained because the ends justify the means, right? They can't very well have journalistic organizations that are off the Biden rails, but to pull off an assault on free speech like this, one that would make the Communist Chinese Party jealous, you would need help from other fully corrupt news organizations that have completely bowed to the state, like, for instance, the New York Times. Cue the obligatory objective New York Times piece that ran today as some weird attempt to impugn the journalistic integrity of Project Veritas. It's a ridiculous piece of journalism, particularly in light of the fact that the New York Times are in a lawsuit with Project Veritas. They are actually receiving leaked information from the FBI and running it as legitimate journalism against someone with whom they are already embroiled in a lawsuit. A little conflict of interest. But remember, it's not about facts, truth, or even fairness. It's about spin and control. The New York Times has now lied prostrate before this authoritarian regime. Journalism is dead. I think it's pretty much dead everywhere. They exist anymore as a mouthpiece for the government. So rather than defend Project Veritas, and remember when the sanctity of the free press, that was something to be defended, right? So now the New York Times can't. They're too busy lying about another media entity because they have to be propagandists for the administration. And they're also taking privileged legal communications between Project Veritas and Project Veritas's attorneys that are leaked to them by the FBI and publishing it. Now, it's likely against the law, but here's the other thing. If they were a real news organization, they would be doing a story as to why in the ever-loving hell someone at the FBI is leaking privileged communications to a media outlet. That would be the story if they were actual journalists. Here's the New York Times article rationalizing the disgusting raid on Project Veritas, saying, quote, Project Veritas has long occupied a gray area between investigative journalism and political spying, and internal documents obtained by the New York Times reveal the extent to which the group has worked with its lawyers to gauge how far its deceptive reporting practices can go before running afoul of federal laws, end quote. They have never gotten over the fact that when James O'Keefe was fresh out of college, he wore his aunt's fur coat and dressed up as a pimp and busted their money laundering organization known as Acorn. God bless America. It's ironic, New York Times, that they operate in areas of gray and shady areas of journalism, that they would actually say that and that other entities would join on, especially since the New York Times. Hi, have you guys heard of Russian collusion? That story that everybody peddled for on and on and on? I'm sure, right? Like for instance, accepting a bogus Steele dossier from Clinton campaign operatives, publishing it without vetting it. That was journalism, according to the newspaper of record. In fact, the New York Times got Pulitzer Prizes for their part in perpetuating the Russian hoax. But Project Veritas, exposing the lies of Big Pharma and government officials about a mandated injection, you get an FBI raid. Our authoritarian regime cannot have the truth getting out after all. And the New York Times' tagline, ironically, is the truth is essential. Well, guess what the murderous communist dictator of the Soviet Union, Joseph Stalin's mouthpiece, was called? Pravda, of course. And yeah, it's truth, Russian for truth. So understand what's occurred in America, the land of the free, where free speech is first and most sacred right. The free press used to be something that other press defended. You have a weaponized Stasi agency known as the FBI that raids journalists' homes on a BS pretext over some broad's diary so that they could scare Project Veritas out of doing their job as investigative reporters. Someone inside the FBI, I would love to tell them to go do something unflattering to themselves, then leaked Project Veritas's documents seized by the FBI and gave them to the administration's bootlickers at the New York Times. And then rather than actually do a story about, wow, can you believe this intelligence agency gave us these privileged communications on a private citizen? Oh my gosh. They aid and abet a corrupt intelligence agency and try to imply that Project Veritas operated outside of the law. Now, to be clear, the privileged communications between Project Veritas and their lawyers, as confiscated by the FBI, indicate just the opposite. And again, just a reminder, Project Veritas and New York Times are involved in a lawsuit already. They show that Project Veritas actually always strives to work within the law. And that's the very reason they consulted a legal team to make sure that they were doing things above the board with that news tip. Now, do you know where else consulting an attorney about evidence and that being indicative of guilt popped up? In the Rittenhouse trial, just this week. So if you remain silent after you're accused of a crime, that's indicative of guilt. There goes the right to remain silent. If you hire an attorney, if you were given information, or if you have information pertaining to an ongoing case, somehow your right to have an attorney is also indicative of guilt. So you see, it's not just the Second Amendment people are stomping all over and the First Amendment, but it's the Fourth, Fifth, Sixth, too. The New York Times knows this, but they don't care. In fact, the New York Times is probably breaking the law, accepting these FBI leaks, of course they are, of Project Veritas's privileged communications to begin with. But again, that's the truth. And the truth doesn't set you free. The truth gets you a raid. Not to the New York Times, truth doesn't matter, nor to the administration. It's control the narrative, control the people, and get control of Project Veritas. And the Biden administration clearly controls these folks at the New York Times, selling out your profession and running interference for the new Stasi agency, the FBI, just like another authoritarian regime called the CCP would. So look, America, honestly, I really believe is now resembling more communist China than the original vision of the founders. And it's not really hyperbole. And the media's complicity in all of this tells you that this is true. The legacy media, like New York Times, they're not holding anybody to account in this all-powerful government. They look to destroy anybody who questions said all-powerful government. Here's James O'Keefe pointing this out. Watch.
So the great question is this an indicator in the direction that America is going? We've gone far beyond the point of partisan politics in this country. They ask us to focus on our divisions. They don't ask us to focus on the things which unite us. What unites us is so much more powerful than what divides us. The First Amendment doesn't just matter to people on one side, it matters to people on all sides. That is why I'm calling on all Americans, and especially all journalists, to stand with us for the right to free speech and the free press, and to send a message that the politics of fear will not prevail in the United States of America.
It shouldn't. But just how far gone is the country at this point? How deep is the corruption of intelligence agencies at the media? The FBI should be disbanded and completely rebuilt if we're to have it. I mean, we realized the full level of corruption under Director James Comey, and then we replaced him with Chris Wray, and we're discovering, yeah, of course, we always knew it was going to be just as corrupt. Same boss, right? New boss, just like the old boss. The FBI aids and abets and scams like they actually tried to give it legitimacy, like the Steele dossier, which was amazing because they promoted it, but they wouldn't publicly verify it or stand by it because they knew that it would make their organization look even worse than it does now. And the entire Russian hoax was predicated on this. And these stories were leaked out after you had Fusion GPS working with the Department of Justice and the Hillary Clinton campaign and the DNC. They leaked these stories out, and we know this because of FOIA requests into exactly whom these stories were leaked. That was redacted, but we know that they were leaked to press outlets because it's stated as such. And then based upon those stories were gathered, taken before a FISA court, and used to substantiate and justify getting a wiretaps and surveilling private citizens who were working with the Trump campaign. No one went to jail. No one paid any costs. The only person who got in trouble was one FBI official whose behavior was so egregious he had to get a wrist slap. And that's when he edited an email from the CIA that was defending Carter Page as an asset against Russia. And this FBI agent actually modified that email, edited it, tampered with evidence, and before submitting it back to the FISA court so as to misrepresent Carter Page as being under surveillance. Disgraced Andrew McCabe got his pension back thanks to AG Merrick Garland, who likes to think of parents as potential domestic terrorists when he's not helping his kids grift off of parents and mining data from school kids. And we know that the FBI tried to pull off a false flag plot. They did, to kidnap Democrat Governor Gretchen Whitmer. The investigation discussed that it was actually pitched and encouraged by an undercover informant, so they could then try to pin it on right-wing extremists. Look, and there's a lot of questions about January 6th. A lot of very interesting people who have been completely shielded from answering any kind of questions, all to enforce some kind of fake narrative of only right-wing white supremacy. Certainly, the FBI was involved to some degree in the events of January 6th. I mean, there are a lot of questions that are being left open, and, I'll just do what they do. If you don't answer, I'll assume. Point is that the FBI has lost all credibility. I wouldn't talk to anybody within the FBI. Nobody. I don't care if they were sitting next to me in church, because you don't have to be under oath for them to come at you. It serves an authoritarian Marxist left-wing party who sees control of Democrats, but perhaps more corrupt than our FBI, even our current administration, it's our legacy press. Because behind the cover of their platitudes like truth is essential and democracy dies in darkness, they're busy little statists selling out their journalistic integrity. Their fellow journalists like Project Veritas, who, if this was a real and fair world, would have won all the awards that New York Times and everyone else bestowed upon each other. And all Americans who deserve the truth. All of this is to prop up an unpopular authoritarian regime and the false narratives that it uses to support itself. Oh, democracy does indeed die in darkness. So how ironic then that it's legacy media that's turning out the lights. Coming up, it's obvious that the swamp is deep based on everything that we've been discussing, but how deep? So not only have we had one indictment already, actually two, Michael Sussman and Igor Dushenko, as it relates to the Steele dossier, but the Washington Post came out today and it's had to remove and correct a number of stories because now they cannot claim confidence in one of their sources. Of course. We'll discuss all this with former U.S. Attorney Joe DiGenova next. Stay with us. Thanks to Biden's economic policies, job numbers have been abysmal and inflation is still skyrocketing. Instead of following the former president's pro-business agenda that had the economy booming, Biden wants to tax corporations and pass trillion-dollar bills that people can't pay for. It's time for you to take proactive steps to protect your wealth in retirement by investing in gold and precious metals, and Legacy Precious Metals can help. Washington keeps printing money for their outrageous bills, but all that does is devalue your dollar. Gold offers you a hedge against inflation, and as the dollar gets weaker, gold gets stronger. The folks at Legacy Precious Metals are the gold standard when it comes to investing in precious metals, and they have a team of experts who can counsel you on the best options for you and your family. Don't leave your retirement to chance. Call Legacy Precious Metals at 866-580-2088 or visit them online to download their free investor's guide full of useful information at legacypminvestments.com. Welcome back. We just brought you up to speed on these Stasi-like tactics coming from the FBI, and we're wondering where we go from here. You can't really trust your intelligence agencies anymore, especially when they're leaking out privileged information. Let's talk with former U.S. Attorney Joe DiGenova about all of this, because he's got great perspective as always. Joe, we always appreciate your time with us. Thank you so much for being here. And I am very eager to get your response to the story that the New York Times had printed, Project Veritas, James O'Keefe's organization. And it's weird because New York Times and Project Veritas are currently embroiled in a lawsuit currently. Project Veritas had sued New York Times for some false reporting. And now here there was a raid at Project Veritas based upon this. It was, the pretext given was Ashley Biden's diary, even though the organization had never claimed that they had it for sure. They weren't actually certain. They had consulted with attorneys first, which was a smart move. And then they had the raid, the FBI raid, and then apparently now some of their privileged and confidential discussions with their attorneys are leaked to the New York Times, who then publish it in a story. I'm just curious as to your reaction on this, because this is a whole new level.
Well, I think it's very important to analyze how this happened and why it happened. I can certainly understand the criticism of the FBI because they are the instrumentality that is being used to effectuate this strategy against the conservative press. But let me give you my sense of what's going on here. Although the FBI executed this search warrant, and then there was a leak to the New York Times, this search warrant was drafted by the Southern District of New York, which, as you know, is part of the Justice Department, run by Merrick Garland. There is no doubt that the Southern District of New York is now in charge, the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District is now in charge of all things Biden. This search warrant for materials related to the Biden diary is absolutely outrageous. But the FBI didn't do that. They executed the orders that they were given, and the search warrant was drafted by the Southern District of New York. The real question here is, how politicized is the U.S. Department of Justice now? And it's pretty clear that the Biden White House is running the Justice Department under Merrick Garland, that the Merrick Garland Justice Department is a complete arm of the White House, and that was what was carried out against James O'Keefe and his associates was a disgraceful abuse of the law and the rules which govern searches of news organizations. Not only that, the leak to the New York Times, I believe, is a criminal act, but good luck trying to get anybody in the Justice Department to investigate it. I think there should be civil litigation over that, and I am very hopeful that the federal judge who stopped the analysis of all the documents that were seized by the Bureau will take some action as a result of the leak to the New York Times.
And to your point, that judge also said that they couldn't go through O'Keefe's phone anymore either. Joe,
That's
what I
correct.
don't understand about this is that would the DOJ and this subsidiary, for the lack of a better way to put it, that the DOJ is directing, and then of course they hand it off to the FBI to execute. Do they have to give a reason as to why it has to escalate up to a federal level? Because this, normally, I mean, if it's theft like this, you would think it's a local law enforcement matter. And I can't believe that they would say that this diary has national security secrets or something to that effect.
Well, I think what you see going on here is the politicization of federal law enforcement. You're absolutely correct. Ordinarily, the theft of this diary would be handled as a local matter. Mr. O'Keefe says he reported it to law enforcement authorities once they decided that they weren't going to use it and didn't know where it came from. Now, he has not said, Mr. O'Keefe, what law enforcement authorities he reported it to. So I'd like to know that. Was it local? Was it the feds? I can't imagine he went to the feds or the FBI. But the answer here lies in the fact that the feds decided to make this a federal matter because all things related to the Biden family are now part of a protective shield, which the Department of Justice, at the request of the White House and the White House counsel, has thrown around the Biden family. This is actually unprecedented. It smacks of olden days of cronyism between the White House and the Justice Department. And I hope there are going to be some hearings by this federal judge in New York over the leak to the New York Times. I think that mistake made by somebody in the Justice Department, either in the FBI, the Southern District, or Maine Justice, the leak to the New York Times of the contents of some of the search material is a crime. And I just really think that judge in New York who stopped the search of Mr. O'Keefe's phone should get into that in a big way and hold some hearings.
Talking with our friend Joe DiGenova. Joe, is there a precedent for something like this being served to the FBI to execute, or this warrant handed down to the FBI to execute, and then there being questions or resistance to that based on the controversial nature and really questionable justification? Have you ever seen anything like? Do they even have the ability or authority to do so?
Well, the Bureau can object to something if they believe it's a violation of the law. Now, in this particular search warrant, my understanding is that the basis for the search was a federal statute that talks about theft of government property, but this isn't government property. I guess they were using it as a possible theft of government property, but the main alleged federal statute that was violated was misprision of a felony. That is, knowing that a crime was being committed and allowing it to happen. That is a ludicrous basis for a search warrant in a case of a news organization which came into possession of an object from an anonymous source and didn't publish anything about it. That's the remarkable part of this. James O'Keefe and his organization did not publish any of the information in the purported diary. So why would there be a search warrant? And the answer for that is, this is an attempt to intimidate people in the conservative media. There's no other explanation for this. They could have used a subpoena for this, but they wanted to use a more intrusive tactic, what I call the in terrorem tactics of a raid, handcuffing people. This is pretty outrageous stuff for a news organization. And even if somebody says, well, the James O'Keefe organization, they're somewhat newsy, they're more investigative, I'm not sure this, I'm not that, it doesn't matter. This is not the way you treat people who are engaged in legitimate, constitutionally protected activities. And the reason it was done was to intimidate people. Just like the letter, like the memo that Garland sent to the FBI to investigate the people protesting the school boards.
Yes, and a great point as well. One quick question on the Project Veritas topic, and I have another question for you on the Steele dossier issue with the WAPO angle now. The New York Times and Project Veritas are already in a lawsuit. Does this complicate this? I mean, they're publishing privileged communications. I mean, I'm just thinking you're in a lawsuit with these people already. Now you're taking their privileged communications with their attorneys and you're publishing it. What does that do to that lawsuit?
It's pretty ballsy on the part of the New York Times, if I may say so. I think if you're going to go bad, go big, apparently. And I think what the Times has done is pretty stupid. I think it's dumb. I think it may be legally disastrous for them. It may create additional liability for them in light of the lawsuit. Remember, the New York Times thought they were going to be able to get Mr. O'Keefe's lawsuit thrown out. But it was allowed to go forward, much to the chagrin of the New York Times, because what happens when you get involved in something like this, you get discovery as a plaintiff, which Mr. O'Keefe is. And that means you get to depose people. You get to get documents from inside the New York Times. And as a result of this leak to the New York Times of the O'Keefe documents, which may very well be directly related to the lawsuit itself, I think Mr. O'Keefe is going to have additional counts in his civil complaint, and he may get additional discovery. I think what the New York Times did was outrageous, but more than that, I think it was legally stupid.
Yeah, it's one of the most brazen things I think I've ever seen. It even tops some of the reporting that all of these entities were doing and giving themselves awards over as it relates to the Russian collusion story. So switching gears, but still from New York Times to Washington Post. Washington Post comes out this afternoon, Joe, and they're actually retracting some, and then they have an editor's note at the bottom of a couple of other stories, because one of the sources on which they were basing some of their reporting on this Russian collusion and the whole stuff with Trump and Moscow, now they can't actually be sure of this source, because the Durham investigation, the indictment came, the last one was on that Igor Tishenko, the Russian operative who was working with Christopher Steele. So they can't actually even now stand behind their reporting, because their source is up in the air. The credibility of their source and whether it was who they suspected at all is up in the air. What are your thoughts on this development?
Well, I think the Washington Post realizes it has a very serious problem. They inappropriately and unprofessionally relied on a source that they never should have relied on. And what they're worried about now is a lawsuit by Sergei Milyan, who was the person who was falsely accused by Danchenko of being a major source for information about this. Milyan has always denied it, and now it has been confirmed through the FBI investigation that Milyan was never a source for any of the information about Trump. I think the Post is worried about a lawsuit by Sergei Milyan, and I think they're worried about other lawsuits. That's why they're starting, believe me, it's not because they're worried about journalistic integrity that they're beginning to print retractions. They're worried about litigation and libel suits. And I think they are going to be sued. I think they're going to be sued by some people because they did not exercise proper control over the sourcing of their stories. Pretty sloppy stuff. This is actual malice. This is reckless disregard for the reputations of people. They're basically accusing people of being spies, involved in treason, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that what you're seeing the Post do is not a mea culpa. It's a oh my God. And there's a big difference between mea culpa and oh my God. And this is all about defensive litigation right now.
Unbelievable. I wish I would have been in the room. I would have loved to have been in the room when they realized after that indictment came down that it was for Tishenko and not Milyan, because then they realized, oh my gosh, we had it all wrong. Joe DiGenova, always appreciate your perspective, my friend. Have a great weekend. Thanks for sharing your time with us.
You bet. Anytime.
Of course. Coming up, folks, after 3 months of calling inflation temporary, President Biden has finally acknowledged it's worrisome. But some media outlets actually say that inflation's a good thing, which it's not. Spoiler alert. Former investment banker and author Carol Roth joins us next to discuss. Black Rifle Coffee Company is not your typical coffee company. Black Rifle Coffee develops their explosive roast profiles with the same mission focus they've learned as military members, and they've spent thousands of hours tasting, sourcing, and perfecting coffee from across the world. They're founded and operated by veterans. They employ veterans, and Black Rifle Coffee knows what a quality cup of coffee means to active duty troops who are away from home for the holidays. So as such, Black Rifle Coffee is committed to supporting all who serve, and with every purchase you make, Black Rifle Coffee gives back. In 2020 alone, they've donated over 6 million cups of coffee to our troops overseas, law enforcement officers, wildland firefighters on the West Coast, and medical workers during the coronavirus response. This November, for every coffee purchase you make, a bag of their limited edition holiday roast will be sent to a service member overseas for Christmas delivery. It will be delivered by Christmas morning. So help support the cause and visit blackriflecoffee.com/DanaTV. Check out their freshest coffee in America. blackriflecoffee.com/DanaTV gets you 20% off coffee apparel gear plus 20% off your first month of the coffee club.
Consumer prices remain too high. Tell us, the American people, in the midst of this economic crisis, the recovery is showing strong results, but not to them. They're still looking out there. Everything from a gallon of gas to a loaf of bread costs more, and it's worrisome.
You think? I mean, you have the president just now saying that inflation is worrisome after dismissing it for the past 3 months. It was only supposed to be temporary, right? Not everybody on the left seems worried about this. In fact, MSNBC says that inflation is actually a good thing, right? Because you can see here in a now deleted tweet, which likely came from a far left activist in the socialist media department over there. And it's not just MSNBC. Do you remember back in October when the Washington Post said that we should just lower our expectations when it comes to supply chain problems? Joining me now to discuss all of this insanity is the lovely author of the book, The War on Small Business, Carol Roth. And love Carol, and she is here with us today, and this is a must-read book because how the government did crush business using the pandemic is amazing. Carol, always so good to see you. So I'm amazed. My favorite soundbite and some of my favorite headlines right now are Joe Biden is shocked about inflation during the Biden administration, or Joe Biden is shocked about high gas prices during the Biden administration. I mean, he realizes cause and effect, I would imagine, but it's not temporary. They always said it was going to be temporary, and now we're hearing, no, it looks like it's here to stay for a long while. I'm wondering how long, Carol?
So I guess you're saying that 16 cents we saved on our hot dogs at 4th of July doesn't apply anymore, I guess, Cindy.
No.
I think it's going to be with us for quite a while, and it is infuriating to people like myself who looked at the 1-2 punch of Fed stimulus and government stimulus, which included, by the way, almost $2 trillion that was spent under the American Rescue Plan this past March, completely unnecessary at a time when vaccines were rolling out, when the economy was reopening, and they just decided to throw trillions more onto this already kindling fire. That the Treasury, that the Fed, that the politicians that are in charge of all of this spending are somehow shocked and surprised that we're going to get runaway inflation just from the stimulus piece, let alone the shutting down of the economy and trying to power cycle it like it was a modem and disrupting the labor supply and demand equation, as well as the supply chain. So if you look at all of the pieces, how long does it last? It kind of depends on what they do from here. Does the Fed, increase interest rates at a faster pace than expected? Possibly not, because as they do that, the interest that we owe on that, whatever it is now, $28 trillion and change worth of debt is going to increase, and it's going to eat up more of every tax dollar. The crazy spending proposals that they have out there that they really want to push through, are they going to step back and say, we're going to put the brakes on that and slow spending? I don't know. I mean, these are the kinds of things that we need to do. And then the dislocation of the labor force, I think that's something that's going to go on for a long time. So I think it's going to continue. The question is the level, and that's all dependent, unfortunately, on these same idiots who created the problems now basically doing something right.
I love the argument that I keep hearing from the White House over and over again, Carol, that, well, wages are up. We're just going to pretend that inflation's not undercutting the value. Wages are up. You're getting paid more money. But I mean, when I was looking at some of the numbers for Thanksgiving, what are they saying? Like a Thanksgiving turkey, you're looking at like a 40-something% increase in per pound cost of turkey and for Thanksgiving, and basic things like food and fuel. I mean, that's kind of stuff that people need to live, especially as temperatures get colder. People are paying more for that. So that really that undermines his claim on increased wages.
Right. So basically, wages are not keeping pace with the overall rate of inflation, and it's unlikely that it will ever catch up. So that differential, your wages may have increased 5%, but if other things have increased 8% or 10%, that delta is what you're losing. And even if those rates both slow down, you're never going to make that up again. So with all of the money printing and everything that's been happening, your dollars are worth less and less over time. And unfortunately for the average American, they're not benefiting in the way that some of the very wealthy asset holders or corporate users of debt might be able to. They may say, well, it's great, we've had cheap access to debt and we can use that to go and compete with you to buy your home. But the average American doesn't think that that's such a great thing, because we don't have the same ability to take on that capacity. So they keep trying to sell this over and over again. You showed the MSNBC piece as a good thing. We've seen it out of CNBC. We've seen it out of Bloomberg. And I'm sorry, folks, but your ability to purchase fewer goods and services with every dollar is never a good thing.
Oh, goodness. I can't imagine this going from food and fuel to just like even, labor cost you mentioned, home construction. I mean, I know a number of people who, in fact, out of 3 friends that we had, 2 just were going to build houses, stopped entirely, and they're renting until things calm down, because it's almost, I was shocked when they were explaining to me, it was double, and in some cases over double, the original cost when they sat down to plan their home and budget it out. I was looking at the lumber and all of the other, oh my gosh. And our other friends just like redid everything, and now they're just going for a much smaller house so they can actually stay within budget. That's the other thing. I mean, the construction costs, building costs, but yet we're building back better. He wants to go for infrastructure, and infrastructure is like super doubly, triply expensive now. Explain that to me, Carol, because it seems like he just shot himself in the foot.
Yeah, I mean, everything cycles through the economy. So let's use the home building example you were speaking about. Whether you are a corporate builder or somebody individually who is going to build, you're not going to do that now because everything is so much more expensive. So when you look at the housing market, that means less supply on the market with the same demand. Anybody who understands basic supply and demand knows that that's going to continue to push prices higher. So we can never make these like individual decisions and not think that they're going to have a ripple effect through the economy. And as you mentioned, the spending that we all know, first of all, is barely even on infrastructure to begin with. And certainly governments had many opportunities to spend on infrastructure with the trillions and trillions that they've taken in over the years. Yes, of course, that's going to be more expensive, and that means whatever they're estimating is going to be a quote unquote conservative, or in my word, faulty, undercut budget, and it's going to end up costing more money. And then when nothing happens, down the road in a few years, and we say, well, why is our infrastructure really bad? Say, oh, well, we just didn't have enough money for it. So that's always the story.
Didn't have enough money to do it.
Right, exactly.
It always is. I can't wait for that. And then I'm going to be like, Carol, remember when you said, you called it, you prophesized it, and it came to be? Carol Roth, always breaking it down smartly. We so appreciate your perspective. You're one of my favorite people to have on and to follow. Always good to see you, my friend.
Back at you. Thanks.
Take care. We have a ton more for you coming up next. Stay with us. If you don't own a home, you have nothing to fear from home title thieves. But if you own a home and you don't guard it with home title lock, you're inviting home title fraud, one of the fastest growing crimes. Cyber thieves around the world know that home values are sky high, and that makes homeowners a target. The crime is scary simple. A cyber thief can simply forge your name on a property sale form and refile it, and then they are on the deed to your home, and you have no idea you're a victim. They can take out loans on your home and vanish, leaving you to prove to police that you didn't commit bank fraud. Home Title Lock puts a virtual barrier around your home's title, and the instant they detect tampering, they help shut it down. Visit HometitleLock.com and register your address to see if you could potentially be a victim. Enter code RADIO for 30 free days of protection. That's code RADIO at HometitleLock.com. Now, as we discussed at the start of the program, the Marxist left is fond of Stasi tactics, lying, coercion, and spying on people to get them to do what they want. So not surprising then to discover an Arizona school board head was keeping a creepy dossier on parents in his school district that he didn't care for. Jan Michael Greenberg, president of the Scottsdale Unified School District, apparently sent an email accidentally to a parent that included a screenshot and a link to a Google Drive, which was public. Kim Stafford, the parent that received that inadvertent link included in an email in which he was accusing her of being an anti-Semite because she had disagreed with CRT in school, shared the URL with various people, including another parent, Amanda Ray, who told the Daily Caller that she was, quote, disgusted when she noticed images of her young daughters as a part of this creeper's dossier. Ray said, quote, when I first saw the contents of the Google Drive and I saw my 8 and 10-year-old's photos, that was terrifying. And what's he doing? But he has pictures of my vacation home, my property records. I'm not a political opponent. I'm an involved parent, and that is threatening to me, and it makes me wonder why and what he was planning to do with those photos, end quote. Folders, and that's to my side there, that's creepy McCreeps a lot. Folders included in the drive, which parents call it an online dossier, which it is. Here's what he named these folders: SUSD wackos, that's one, anti-mask lunatics, and press conference psychos. And the last, that actually sounds like a great metal cover band of just parents who hate CRT. The last of these included a video showing parents holding signs reading, "CRT is racist," and "SUSD, we demand transparency." And they were just standing there very politely with their signs. They weren't even making noises because I've seen the video. And apparently, school board president Jan Michael Greenberg's father, Mark Greenberg, Creeper, he was recorded, recorded, taking photos of parents and children without their knowledge, because that's exactly what a pervert would do. The school district is blaming the school board's president's dad for the entire incident. I'm sorry, sidebar. This is the guy's dad? You're telling me Mr. McFlub's face has to have his dad here that goes, I mean, what kind of a creeper are you? But the parents aren't buying it, to their credit. And the parents, add to the parents' frustration, they have no way of removing school board president Jan Michael Greenberg until next election. I'd be really studying all y'all's bylaws. Once again, we see a school board president who's acting like a domestic terrorist, like so many other school boards across the country, behaving as if they are above accountability, and the people who they serve, the people whose tax dollars pay their salaries, they treat them like enemies and political opponents. And they're going after them. Somehow we all fell asleep and we allowed the very worst bottom of the barrel of human society to take over, like this guy, at some of our local school boards. Now, there are some good folks there, but I shouldn't have to say that as a caveat because everybody's going to be too damn sensitive to it. There are a lot of creepers on school boards, let's be real. And America's parents are wide awake now, and the evidence continues to pile up. Public schools are out of control, and judging by the election in Virginia, parents have had enough. FAFO. That does it for us tonight. Thanks for tuning in. Good night, and don't bend the knee.